My name is Harper Calloway. I'm 27 years old. 3 weeks ago, my father stood in the middle of our Plano living room under the same brass chandelier he picked out when he made partner and screamed, "Get out and stay out." The leather couch still smelled like the conditioner my mom used every Sunday. The grandfather clock by the stairs kept ticking like nothing was happening. I remember staring at the second hand because it felt steadier than my own breathing. I had just told them I was dropping out of law school. My father's face turned the same deep red it used to when I spilled water on his case files as a kid. "No daughter of mine quits law school," he said. "You're throwing your life away." My mom didn't yell. She just looked at me and said, "You're embarrassing us." So I left. One suitcase. No plan. No apology. What they didn't know was that the next morning I boarded a 6:10 a.m. flight to LAX. I wasn't homeless. I wasn't broke. I moved into my $32 million Malibu mansion, and 3 weeks later, my father called me. Not to apologize. Before I tell you why he called and what he asked for, take a second to like and subscribe if you've ever been told you were ruining your life for choosing your own path. And tell me, have you ever walked away from something everyone else said you needed, only to build something they couldn't even imagine? I grew up in a house where silence meant disapproval and achievement meant survival. Plano isn't flashy, but in our neighborhood, prestige lived in small details. German sedans in 3-car garages, lawns edged with surgical precision, last names engraved on brass mailboxes. My father, Daniel Calloway, liked to remind me that our zip code was earned, not inherited. He said it the way other men quoted scripture. Dinner in our house was never just dinner. It was oral argument. My father would sit at the head of the table, still in his suit cufflinks glinting under the recessed lights, and dissect whatever corporate litigation case he was working on. He'd turn to me mid-bite and ask Harper if opposing counsel files a motion to dismiss under Rule 12b6. "What's your strategy?" I was 14 the first time he asked that. I remember the smell of rosemary chicken going cold on my plate. I remember the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I remember guessing. He didn't yell when I got it wrong. He'd just sigh. That was worse. By high school, it wasn't a question of whether I would go to law school. It was where. My father kept framed photos of himself at the University of Texas School of Law in his office next to the Longhorn logo and a photo of me in pigtails. "Legacy matters," he would say. "We build on what came before." What came before in his mind was him. What came before in mine was my grandmother. Margaret Hale didn't care about case law. She cared about code. When I was 12, she gave me an old MacBook and showed me how to build a basic encryption script. Her house smelled like sandalwood and printer ink. She never asked me about grades. She asked me what I was building. When I told her I liked computer science, she nodded like that made perfect sense. When I told my father, he said coding is a hobby. Law is a profession. I started at UT Austin as a computer science major anyway. For 2 years, I lived in labs that smelled like burnt coffee and overheated processors. I stayed up until 2 a.m., debugging lines of code that felt more honest than anything I'd ever memorized from a textbook. The summer before junior year, my father invited me to his firm's annual partner retreat at a lake house outside Dallas. He introduced me to colleagues as my future associate. Not my daughter, not Harper, my future associate. On the drive home, he said, "You've had your fun. It's time to think seriously." He had already printed out the transfer paperwork for pre-law. I switched majors that semester. Law school at UT was exactly what you'd expect. Cold classrooms, fluorescent lighting that flattened everyone's face into the same exhausted shade, casebooks that smelled like ink and stress. I sat in the third row, took meticulous notes, and felt like I was watching someone else's life from a polite distance. I did well. That was the part that confused everyone later. I wasn't failing. I wasn't drowning academically. I just felt like my lungs were permanently half full. At night, instead of outlining torts, I logged into a private Slack channel with two former classmates from computer science. We had been quietly building a fraud detection algorithm designed for small online lenders AI trained to flag synthetic identities and layered transaction anomalies. It started as an experiment. Then it started working. We incorporated as a Delaware LLC during my second year of law school. I signed the documents electronically between classes on secured transactions and federal jurisdiction. My equity was meaningful, but I never told my parents. Not because I was ashamed, because I was tired. Tired of defending every interest that didn't align with my father's blueprint. When my grandmother passed away 2 years ago, the funeral was quiet. No dramatic readings of wills, no public declarations. My mother told me everything had been handled. I didn't press. I was studying for finals at the time. What I didn't know then, what my father certainly didn't know, was that my grandmother had created an irrevocable trust years earlier under California jurisdiction, funded largely by the sale of her cybersecurity company back in 2009. She had structured it carefully diversified portfolios, municipal bonds, private equity allocations, and one residential property in Malibu held in the name of the trust. The trust named a corporate trustee in Los Angeles. It also named a sole beneficiary. Me. There was a condition attached. I wouldn't gain full access until I turned 27 and demonstrated independent professional capacity. It wasn't defined by a law degree. It was defined by financial competence and sustained work outside parental control. My grandmother had been precise like that. I didn't learn the full details until much later. But even before I knew about the trust scale, I knew something else. I knew I couldn't finish law school. The decision didn't come in a blaze of rebellion. It came quietly in the law library under the buzzing fluorescent lights. I was outlining for an exam on corporate governance when my phone buzzed with the notification our startup had just secured a major institutional pilot contract. Real money. Real traction. I stared at the screen for a long time. My reflection looked pale against the glass. I realized I felt more alive reading that email than I had in 2 years of case briefs. That night, I drove back to Plano. The highway was nearly empty, just long strips of asphalt under Texas sky. I rehearsed the conversation in my head. I thought if I explained it logically, equity projections, risk mitigation, my father would at least listen. I should have known better. By the time I pulled into our driveway, the porch light was on. My father's office window upstairs was glowing. The house looked the same as it had my entire life. I walked inside knowing that whatever happened next would divide my life into before and after. I just didn't know yet how wide that line would be. When I told them, it wasn't dramatic at first. We were sitting at the dining table. My mother had made salmon with lemon butter. The television in the living room was still murmuring some cable news panel about interest rates and election polls. My father had loosened his tie but hadn't taken it off. That should have warned me. He never fully relaxed on weeknights. "I'm withdrawing," I said. My voice didn't shake. I had practiced that part. "I filed the paperwork this afternoon." My mother's fork paused mid-air. "Withdrawing from what law school?" There's a specific kind of silence that follows a sentence like that. It isn't confusion. It's calculation. My father leaned back slowly in his chair. He didn't explode immediately. He studied me the way he used to study witnesses during depositions, waiting for the inconsistency. "You're what he asked. I'm leaving the program. I've been building something for 2 years. It's working. I want to do it full time." What something? His voice was still controlled. That was the dangerous part. A fintech platform, fraud detection. We just secured. He slammed his palm against the table so hard the water glasses rattled. The sound cracked through the room, sharp and final. "You are not throwing away a top-tier legal education for some internet hobby." "It's not a hobby," I said. "We incorporated. We have institutional backing. I have equity. You have tuition bills, he cut in. You have a name attached to this family. My mother finally spoke. Harper. Do you understand what people will say? Daniel's colleagues? Our friends? I remember staring at the tiny scratch in the wood grain of the table. I had made it with a pen in high school while studying for the SAT. That scratch had survived longer than most of my arguments in that house. This isn't about people, I said quietly. It's about what I'm actually good at. My father stood up. His chair scraped hard against the floor. What you're good at, he repeated like it was offensive. You are good at finishing what you start. You are good at discipline. You are good at not embarrassing your family. I'm not embarrassing anyone. You're quitting, he said. That's what failures do. The word hung there. Failure. I felt it land somewhere deep but dull like a bruise you don't touch. I'm not failing, I said. I'm choosing something else. There is no something else, he snapped. There is law. There is stability. There is respect. You don't get to improvise your life because you're bored. I'm not bored, I said, and that was the first time my voice cracked. Not from fear. From frustration. He stepped closer. I could smell his cologne cedarwood and something metallic underneath it. You think you're smarter than generations of people who built this name. You think you know better than me? I didn't answer fast enough. That was when he said it. Get out, he shouted. My mother gasped, but she didn't contradict him. Get out and stay out. If you walk away from law school, you walk away from this house. From our support. From everything. The grandfather clock ticked behind him. Steady. Indifferent. I waited for him to take it back. To soften it. To add a condition. He didn't. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. Maybe some time on your own will teach you perspective, she said. Perspective. I went upstairs. I packed one suitcase. I didn't cry. I folded my clothes carefully like I was leaving a hotel room and expected to come back. When I came down, my father was standing by the front door, arms crossed. Don't call when this little experiment collapses, he said. You made your choice. I stepped outside into the humid Texas night. The air smelled like cut grass and asphalt still holding heat from the day. Our porch light cast a yellow circle on the driveway. Behind me, the door closed. Not slammed. Closed. And just like that, the life I had been performing for 27 years was over. I didn't drive anywhere dramatic that night. No cinematic breakdown on the side of the highway. I parked 3 streets over in front of a row of darkened houses that looked exactly like mine. Brick. Trimmed hedges. Closed blinds. The kind of street where nothing bad was supposed to happen. I turned off the engine and just sat there. My phone screen lit up in the dark interior of the car. 2 emails from my co-founder about the pilot contract. 1 automated notification from the university confirming receipt of my withdrawal form. No missed calls from my parents. I expected panic. Instead, I felt clear. There was 1 number I had saved but never used directly. Victor Langford. He was listed in an old folder my grandmother had mailed to me a few months before she passed. At the time, I assumed it was estate paperwork my mother had already handled. I hadn't examined it closely. I was in finals week. Grief and exhaustion blur things. But 3 weeks earlier, on my 27th birthday, I had received a formal email from a Los Angeles-based trust company requesting a beneficiary status confirmation meeting. The subject line referenced the Hale Irrevocable Trust. I had scheduled the call but postponed it twice. Law school exams felt more urgent. Family expectations felt heavier. Now parked under a Texas streetlight with a suitcase in my trunk, that email resurfaced in my mind with a different weight. I dialed the number. Victor answered on the second ring. His voice was steady, measured. Ms. Calloway. I think it's time we have that meeting, I said. We scheduled a video conference for the next morning at 8 a.m. Central. I slept in my car that night. Not because I had to, I could have called a friend, but because I needed the quiet. The seat didn't recline fully. My neck hurt. The air smelled faintly of old coffee and leather. Around 3 a.m., sprinklers turned on across the street in mechanical bursts. It felt like the world continuing without me. At 7:45 a.m., I drove to a small cafe that had just opened. I ordered black coffee and sat in a corner booth near an outlet. My reflection in the laptop screen looked older than it had the day before. Victor appeared exactly at 8 o'clock. Gray suit. Neutral background. No small talk. "Ms. Calloway," he began, "as of your 27th birthday, you meet the age requirement set forth in Article 4 of the Hale Irrevocable Trust." He spoke the way my father did in court, precise, unemotional. But there was no condescension in it. "There is an additional clause," he continued. "The trust requires demonstration of independent professional capacity. Specifically evidence that you have sustained professional engagement outside of direct parental financial dependency." "I have that," I said. He nodded slightly. "We've reviewed corporate filings for Sentinel Forge Technologies LLC, Delaware registration. You hold a substantial equity position and serve as Chief Product Officer. We've also reviewed compensation history and capital structure from your latest funding round." My hands tightened around the coffee cup. I hadn't realized how thoroughly they had already assessed me. "The trustee board has unanimously confirmed that you satisfy the condition," he said. "Effective immediately, you are entitled to full beneficiary rights, including discretionary distributions and residential use of trust-held property." He paused, then added, "The Malibu property has been maintained and remains unencumbered. Title is held by the trust." I blinked. "Maintained?" "Yes. Property taxes are current. Insurance policies active. The home has been staffed periodically for upkeep. It was your grandmother's wish that it remain available to you." I felt something shift in my chest. Not excitement. Recognition. My grandmother had never said it outright, but she had been planning for this version of me. Not the version my father imagined. The one she saw. Victor shared documents on screen. Asset allocations. Portfolio summaries. Real estate valuations. The total figure at the bottom of the consolidated statement read just over $32 million. The number didn't feel real. What felt real was the structure behind it. Diversified municipal bonds, long-term ETFs, private equity placements in cybersecurity firms. The Malibu house valued at approximately $7.5 million alone, based on recent coastal comps in Los Angeles County. "This is not lottery money," Victor said calmly, as if reading my thoughts. "This is structured capital designed for longevity." I signed the formal acknowledgement electronically. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I understood exactly what it meant. Autonomy. After the call ended, I closed my laptop and sat very still. 24 hours earlier, my father had told me I was throwing my life away. Now I had legal control over assets he didn't even know existed. I booked a one-way ticket to Los Angeles, departing at 6:10 a.m. the next morning. At the airport, I traveled light. One suitcase. No dramatic texts sent. No announcements. When the plane lifted off, Texas flattened beneath me into grids and highways. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. At LAX, a car arranged by the trust company was waiting. The driver didn't make conversation. We merged onto the Pacific Coast Highway as the late morning light spilled across the water. Malibu doesn't announce itself loudly. It unfolds curves of coastline, muted gates, houses tucked into cliffs. When we pulled up to the property, the gate opened automatically. The house wasn't a flashy glass tower. It was restrained. Clean lines, neutral stone, floor-to-ceiling windows facing the ocean. Inside, it smelled faintly of salt air and polished wood. I walked through each room slowly, not as someone claiming victory, but as someone measuring responsibility. The master bedroom opened onto a terrace overlooking the Pacific. Waves rolled in with indifferent rhythm. I set my suitcase down near the bed and stood there for a long time. No one yelling, no one evaluating, no one measuring me against a legacy I didn't choose. That night, I slept with the balcony doors slightly open. The sound of the ocean replaced the ticking of the grandfather clock in Plano. I didn't post anything online. I didn't call my parents. I didn't announce where I was. I just began setting up my life the way I had always imagined it, quietly. 3 weeks passed, and then my phone rang. It was my father. When my father's name flashed across my screen, I let it ring twice before answering. Not out of spite, out of control. Before I tell you what he said and why his voice didn't sound the same, let me ask you something. If someone threw you out believing you'd crawl back, would you correct them immediately? Or would you wait until they needed you? If you've ever been underestimated by your own family, stay with me. Because this call wasn't about reconciliation. It was about leverage. I answered on the third ring. Harper. My father's voice was measured. Too measured. The kind he used in court when he knew a jury was listening. Hi, Dad. No apology. No hesitation. I heard you've been busy, he said. That was new. He never trailed off mid-sentence. He liked declarative statements. I've been working, I replied. There was a pause, paper shifting on his end. I imagined him in his home office in Plano-framed degrees behind him, blinds half drawn against the Texas sun. I received a call from a Victor Langford, he said carefully. He mentioned something called the Hale Trust. I didn't answer immediately. The ocean was loud behind me through the open balcony doors. It filled the silence in a way the ticking grandfather clock used to. Yes, I said. That would be Grandma's trust. You failed to mention, he continued, that you were beneficiary to a multi-million-dollar structure. I almost smiled at the phrasing. Structure. As if reducing it to technical architecture would make it smaller. You never asked, I said. Another pause. This one tighter. I'm hosting the Dallas Legal Charity Gala in 2 weeks, he said. Several managing partners from Austin and Houston will be present. It would be beneficial if you attended. Beneficial? For whom, I asked. For the family, he said, sharper now. There are narratives circulating. It would help if you clarified certain misconceptions. What misconceptions? That you've been financially irresponsible? That you left law school without a plan? That you're unstable? Unstable? I let the word settle. I'd heard variations of it my whole life. Too independent, too stubborn, too unwilling to comply. I'm not interested in damage control, I said calmly. This isn't damage control, he insisted. It's optics. Optics. 3 weeks ago, he told me not to call when my experiment collapsed. Now he wanted me on stage as supporting evidence that his daughter hadn't imploded. I'll consider it, I said. After we hung up, I called Victor. You're under no obligation to attend, he reminded me. I know, I said. But I think I will. The gala was held at a downtown Dallas hotel ballroom with high ceilings and chandeliers that tried too hard to look historic. I flew in that morning on a commercial flight. No private jet theatrics. No dramatic entrances. Victor met me in the lobby. He wore the same gray suit as always. Efficient. Neutral. You understand? He said quietly as we walked toward the ballroom that once discussed publicly the existence of the trust becomes part of broader social awareness. I understand, I said. Inside the room smelled like expensive perfume and catered steak. Round tables dressed in white linen. Name cards in gold script. I recognized half the faces partners from my father's firm judges' donors. My father was near the stage laughing at something a senior litigator had said. When he saw me, his smile froze for half a second before reforming. Harper, he said loudly as if summoning a pleasant surprise. You made it. I wore a simple black dress. No diamonds, no statement jewelry. Just a thin gold bracelet my grandmother had given me when I turned 18. I wouldn't miss it, I replied. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. We'll keep this simple. Smile. Congratulate the firm on its pro bono initiative. No mention of extraneous details. Extraneous. Victor stepped forward slightly. Good evening, Mr. Calloway. My father's expression shifted, controlled but alert. And you are? He asked. Victor Langford, Managing Director of Langford Private Trust Company. We've spoken. Several nearby conversations softened as people registered the name. Yes, my father said evenly, briefly. Dinner progressed with speeches about community impact and access to justice. My father took the stage midway through the evening, delivering a polished address about legacy mentorship and building futures. He gestured toward me at one point. My daughter recently decided to pursue entrepreneurial ventures, he said, careful with the phrasing. While not the path I envisioned, I trust she'll eventually recognize the value of discipline. Polite laughter. He invited me to join him on stage. I walked up slowly. The lights were warmer up there, brighter. I could see the room clearly, faces tilted upward, waiting for something mildly entertaining. Harper, he said into the microphone, would you like to share a few words about your journey? I took the microphone. It felt lighter than I expected. My journey, I began steady, has been about building systems that prevent financial fraud in underserved lending markets. A few eyebrows lifted. I co-founded a company called Sentinel Forge Technologies 2 years ago. We specialize in AI-driven anomaly detection. Earlier this year, we closed a Series C funding round. Murmurs now. Real ones. And as of this month, I serve as sole beneficiary of the Hale Irrevocable Trust, established by my grandmother, Margaret Hale. The room shifted. Subtle, but undeniable. Victor remained near the stage steps, not speaking, just present. The trust holds diversified assets including municipal bond portfolios, private equity stakes, and residential property in Los Angeles County, I said calmly. Its purpose was to ensure I had the freedom to build independently. I handed the microphone back to my father. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He hadn't anticipated specifics, numbers, structure, legitimacy. This is neither rebellion nor recklessness, I added, turning slightly back toward the audience. It's governance, just in a different form. Silence followed. Not awkward. Assessing. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the daughter disappointing expectations. I was the one holding audited statements. My father forced a smile. Applause began hesitant at first, then stronger. When we stepped off the stage, he grabbed my arm lightly. Not aggressive. Controlled. You blindsided me, he said under his breath. No, I replied. You just never thought to look. Across the ballroom, I could already see partners recalculating. Not gossiping, calculating. Capital changes how rooms behave. The confrontation wasn't loud. No shouting. No public humiliation. It was quieter than that. It was recognition. And my father hated that he couldn't cross-examine it. The applause faded, but the energy in the ballroom didn't return to normal. It shifted. You can feel it when perception changes. Conversations don't stop, they redirect. People who once overlooked you suddenly want context, clarification, access. My father stayed near me for the next 10 minutes like a political handler, smiling, nodding, light hand on my back, as if proximity could imply influence. Ladies and gentlemen, he said to a small circle of partners from Houston, Harper has always been unconventional. Unconventional. Not incompetent anymore. Not reckless. Just inconvenient to categorize. One of the senior attorneys, a woman I'd known since high school, looked at me with open curiosity. You said Series C, she asked. That's late-stage capital. Yes, I said. We focused on regional lenders first, Our fraud detection models reduced synthetic identity losses by 38% in pilot markets. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't inflate projections. I just spoke facts. My father's jaw flexed slightly. And the trust, another man asked, lowering his voice. Margaret Hale, as in Hale Cybersecurity. Yes. Recognition flickered. Margaret Hale wasn't a Dallas socialite. She had built and sold a cybersecurity firm quietly in California, long before data breaches were headline news. The Hale Irrevocable Trust was funded post-acquisition, I said. Structured under California jurisdiction, it avoids probate entirely. Asset allocation is diversified. I'm not liquidating anything. It's long-term capital. I watched it happen in real time. Respect replacing assumption. Victor stepped closer at that moment, not to dominate the conversation, but to anchor it. The trust's governance is professionally managed, he added evenly. Ms. Calloway's access is structured and compliant with all applicable regulations. He didn't need to say more. Authority doesn't shout. My father cleared his throat. Well, of course, we've always emphasized financial literacy in our family. I turned to him slowly. We emphasized control, I said quietly enough that only he could hear. His smile didn't drop, but his eyes did. Later in the evening, as dessert plates were cleared and wine glasses refilled, he pulled me aside near the bar. This didn't need to be public, he said. You invited me on stage. You could have been discreet. I replied. I didn't mention valuation. That was when he lost composure for a fraction of a second. How much, he asked. There it was. Not, how are you? Not, why didn't you tell us just valuation? I held his gaze. Enough. His nostrils flared slightly. Victor implied 32 million, I said calmly. Approximately. The number didn't echo loudly. It didn't need to. It landed between us like a document signed in ink. He leaned back against the bar as if recalibrating gravity. You expect me to believe you accumulated that independently? He asked. I didn't say I accumulated it, I said. Grandma structured it. I met the conditions. And those conditions conveniently aligned with you abandoning law school. No, I said. They aligned with me proving I could build something without you. That was the truth he couldn't dispute. Because the trust clause didn't mention degrees. It mentioned independent professional capacity, sustained income, demonstrated governance. Everything he had dismissed as a hobby. He looked around the room scanning faces. Some people were pretending not to watch. Others weren't pretending at all. You've embarrassed me, he said quietly. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. You embarrassed yourself, I replied. 3 weeks ago you told me not to call when my experiment collapsed. He didn't deny it. You could have told us, he said after a long pause. I tried to tell you I was building something, I said. You didn't want details. You wanted compliance. Silence stretched. For a moment I saw something underneath his anger. Not remorse, not pride, disorientation. He had built his identity around being the architect of our family's success, the provider, the authority, the final word. And now there was a structure in place that he neither created nor controlled. I assume he said carefully that the Malibu property is part of this arrangement. Yes. You're living there. Yes. Ocean-facing, unencumbered, held in trust. I didn't describe it. I didn't need to. His expression hardened again. Be careful, he said. Wealth isolates. I've been isolated for years, I replied. This just changed the view. He exhaled through his nose the way he did when conceding a minor procedural point in court. Around us, conversations resumed at full volume. Laughter, glassware clinking, the event moving on. But something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't the daughter who dropped out of law school. I was the beneficiary of a legally fortified estate structure. The co-founder of a late-stage fintech company, The woman who had walked out with a suitcase and returned with audited numbers. The reveal wasn't explosive, it was structural. And my father understood something now that he hadn't before. He could challenge my decisions. He could question my character. But he couldn't dismantle documentation. When I left the ballroom later that night, the Dallas air felt thick and warm against my skin. Victor walked beside me toward the exit. "You handled that precisely," he said. "I learned from watching a litigator," I replied. Behind us, through the glass doors, I could see my father standing alone for the first time that evening. Not defeated, just recalculating. And for once, I wasn't the variable he could control. The fallout didn't explode overnight. It moved quietly, strategically, the way reputational shifts usually do in professional circles. Within 48 hours of the gala, 2 managing partners from Austin had requested private clarification meetings with my father. Not about me directly, about potential conflicts of interest, about whether the Hale Trust had any overlap with cases his firm was litigating. It didn't. Victor had already anticipated that question, but perception matters almost as much as fact in corporate law. And now there was a new perception circulating through Dallas legal circles. Daniel Calloway had underestimated his own daughter's financial position. That detail traveled. I didn't monitor it obsessively. I heard about it indirectly. A former classmate forwarded me a screenshot from a legal industry newsletter mentioning emerging fintech leadership connected to Hale Cybersecurity Capital. My name was included. My father's was not. He called me 4 days after the gala. This time, there was no formal tone. "You blindsided the firm," he said. "I stated facts," I replied. "You changed how people see me." I stood barefoot on the balcony in Malibu while he spoke. The Pacific was gray that morning, the sky low with marine layer. The air smelled faintly of salt and eucalyptus from somewhere down the cliffside. I didn't change anything I said. I revealed what already existed. There was a long pause. "We've had 2 clients express concerns," he admitted. "They don't like uncertainty." "Neither do I," said evenly. "That's why I prefer transparency." He didn't respond to that. Instead, he shifted tactics. "Your mother is upset," he said. "She thinks you're punishing us." I leaned against the balcony railing, cool metal against my palms. "I'm not punishing anyone," I said. "I moved out because you told me to." That was said in anger. It was said clearly. He exhaled sharply. "Families say things." "Yes," I agreed. "And sometimes those things have consequences." The consequences weren't dramatic. He didn't lose his partnership. He didn't face public scandal. This wasn't a courtroom defeat. But something more subtle happened. Invitations shifted. At the next regional firm summit, he wasn't asked to moderate the keynote panel. A younger partner was. A woman who specialized in emerging financial technologies. My name surfaced again in that context. Meanwhile, my mother began texting me. Small messages at first. "Are you eating properly? Malibu must be expensive." Then more pointed ones. "Your father is under a lot of stress. You know he just wanted what was best for you." I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I responded politely. Briefly. I set a boundary without announcing it. Back in Malibu, my life didn't feel extravagant. It felt structured. Mornings started with product meetings across time zones. Afternoons were strategy calls with compliance consultants. Evenings were quiet, just the ocean and the low hum of the HVAC system. The house wasn't a trophy. It was space. Space to think without interruption. Space to build without commentary. 3 weeks after the gala, I received a formal letter not from my father, but from his firm. It was cautious, professional. They were exploring a potential advisory partnership with fintech platforms specializing in fraud mitigation. They requested a preliminary discussion with Sentinel Forge. The irony wasn't lost on me. My father called that night. "This isn't personal," he said. "It's business." I let the silence stretch. It was always business, I replied. He didn't argue. Because beneath the hurt pride and strained conversations, there was something he understood now. He couldn't threaten withdrawal of support. He couldn't leverage tuition payments. He couldn't question my financial literacy. The structure around me was too solid. The real consequence wasn't that he lost clients, it was that he lost leverage. And for a man who built his identity on control, that was the heavier loss. I didn't celebrate it. I didn't post anything online. I just continued building. The difference now was simple. When my phone rang, I answered because I chose to. Not because I depended on the caller. People assume the best part of my story is the house. They picture glass walls, ocean views, $32 million like it's a cinematic punchline. Like the point was to prove someone wrong with a bigger number. It wasn't. The house is quiet in a way my childhood home never was. In Plano, even silence felt conditional. You were quiet so you wouldn't disappoint. So you wouldn't provoke a lecture. So you wouldn't trigger a sigh. Here, the quiet doesn't judge me. In the mornings, I sit at the kitchen counter with my laptop open and the sound of waves breaking below the cliff. There's a faint smell of salt in the air when the wind shifts. No one asks me what case I'm studying. No one checks whether I'm meeting someone else's definition of success. For years, I thought stability meant approval. If my father approved, I was safe. If I followed the path laid out for me, I would be protected from uncertainty. That's what I was taught. Law is stable, tradition is stable, obedience is stable. But that kind of stability comes with a condition. It only holds as long as you comply. The night he told me to get out, something uncomfortable became clear. The support I thought was unconditional had terms I never negotiated. When I stepped into the Malibu house for the first time, I didn't feel powerful. I felt responsible. Not just for the assets, but for the version of myself my grandmother had quietly invested in. She never told me to be a lawyer. She never told me to rebel. She just created a structure that allowed me to choose. That's what wealth did for me, not flash, not revenge. Choice. My father once said, "Legacy matters." He was right. But legacy isn't just a profession passed down like a surname. It's values. It's foresight. It's whether you equip someone to think for themselves. The irony is, I learned discipline from him. Precision. Control. How to speak without raising my voice. How to document everything. I just applied it differently. People also assume I hate my parents now. I don't. I just don't need them the way I used to. That's a quieter shift than anger. And in some ways, more final. When my mother texts me about real estate trends in California, I answer kindly. When my father calls to discuss regulatory frameworks affecting fintech compliance, I listen. But I don't bend. I don't shrink my ambitions to fit their comfort. I don't edit my success to protect their pride. The biggest change isn't financial, it's internal. I no longer mistake criticism for authority. I no longer equate love with control. And I no longer ask permission to build the life that feels aligned. The ocean outside my window doesn't care whether I have a law degree. It doesn't measure me against anyone's expectations. It just moves consistent, steady, indifferent to opinion. That's what freedom feels like. Not loud, not vindictive, just steady. And for the first time in my life, steady belongs to me. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: success doesn't get louder when it's real. It gets quieter. I didn't win because I had $32 million. I didn't win because my father lost leverage. I won because I stopped asking permission to define my own life. If you've ever been told your path was irresponsible, unrealistic, embarrassing, maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was just different from what someone else could control. If this story resonated with you, subscribe. I share these stories for people rebuilding their lives without applause. And tell me, have you ever walked away from security to protect your identity? Next time, I'll tell you what happened when my father asked to become my company's legal advisor.